UFC on ESPN 4. RDA versus Leon Edwards goes down this Saturday. Starts at 9 p.m. Eastern in San Antonio, Texas. Now that we got all the details out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into my predictions. For what is I would say a pretty decently stacked card. A lot of good fights on the main card. At the top of the card, obviously, like I just said, is RDA versus Leon Edwards. So I usually start at the first fight on the main card, but you know what? I'm going to start with the main event this time. RDA versus Leon Edwards. It will be a very good test to see where Leon Edwards is truly at in the welterweight division. The dude's won a ton of fights in a row. He's 17-3 as a pro. He's 9-1 in his last 10 fights, which all took place in the UFC. That one setback being against current champ Kamaru Usman. So obviously that's a pretty dang good record, especially considering, like I said, all those fights have been in the UFC. His last two fights were against Gunnar Nelson, in which he won a split decision, and the fight before that was his fight against Donald Cowboy Cerrone, which he won a pretty comfortable unanimous decision. Now both of those two are pretty impressive wins because of who the opponent was. The fight against Gunnar Nelson, like I said, it was a split decision, but Leon Edwards was handedly winning that fight until the third round. In fact, I think he almost finished Gunnar a few times. And then the third round, he got taken down, he got mounted, and honestly, if the fight had went on a little bit longer, he may have got finished. Gunnar Nelson is no joke on the ground. The dude, he knows how to finish fights once he gets on top of his opponent, and that's what happened to Leon Edwards. I think, in a way, he kind of got saved by the bell, but up until that point, he was absolutely dominating the fight. So like I said, this will be a good matchup because it should give us a very good indication of where he truly is in the welterweight pecking order. I was really hoping that fight with Jorge Masvidal would materialize, especially after the whole three-piece and soda incident. For whatever reason, the UFC chose not to jump on that fight, even though the storyline clearly wrote itself. Instead, they went with the Ben Askren versus Jorge Masvidal fight, and thank goodness they did, because if they didn't, then we would have never had that absolutely insane 5-second flying knee knockout. But, you know, that's all in the past. Looking forward to Saturday. Now we have RDA versus Leon Edwards. What to say about RDA, man? He has fought everybody. At 155 pounds, he was champ. He fought pretty much everyone there. All the notable fighters at the time at 155, and now he's been at welterweight for a while, and he's fought pretty much everyone at 170 pounds as well, which includes current champ Kamaru Usman and interim, I don't know if he's still interim champ or not, I'm not really sure where that sits, but Colby Covington. Those are his two most recent losses. But those are also the two fighters at the top of the welterweight division. So you can't really hate on him too much for those losses. He didn't get finished in either of them, but he did lose a unanimous decision in both fights. RDA, if nothing else, man, he always brings it. He's got crazy cardio, crazy pressure, really good grappling. He's kind of a jack of all trades. He's good at everything. I would say he's not amazing at anything, but he doesn't really have any glaring weaknesses. When it comes to Saturday versus Leon Edwards, I already said this a couple times, but I think it's going to be a great test for both fighters, not just Leon Edwards. Like I said earlier, in Leon Edwards' last 10 fights, he has 9 victories. The majority of those wins, however, were decision victories. So I wouldn't say he's really known as a finisher by any means, which means most likely in this fight, if he's going to win, he's going to have to outpoint RDA, which is much easier said than done. Now, RDA has been outpointed in the past. Like I said, he recently lost to Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington, but those two fighters are two of the best wrestlers in the welterweight division, if not in the entire UFC. And if you can't out-wrestle and out-grind RDA, good luck winning a decision. Because like I said, the dude has great cardio, he has great pressure, and he always brings it. He outworked the heck out of Robbie Lawler in that fight, absolutely dominated Robbie Lawler. He just put a crazy pace on him that whole fight, didn't let him breathe, and just took the fight to him the whole fight. He didn't get tired, and it was a great performance. His most recent fight against Kevin Lee, which didn't happen all that long ago, was kind of a similar fight. Kevin Lee put up some pretty decent resistance early on in that fight. He was giving him a good fight, but once he started to get tired, started to wear out a little bit, that's when RDA really turned up the pressure, and eventually he got the finish via submission in the 4th round. So taking that all into account, I honestly don't really see Leon Edwards having too great of a path to victory. Like I said, he's not much of a finisher, especially in the UFC, and I don't think he's got what it takes to outpoint RDA. He's not a great wrestler, he's not a great grappler, he is a good striker, but RDA is a great striker as well, and I think RDA is probably going to use his grappling in this fight, probably take the fight to the ground. He'll grind him out as much as he can, wear on him as much as he can, and just bring a crazy pace. I think eventually Leon Edwards is going to start to get tired, especially with all the grappling exchanges that will likely happen in this fight. And I think RDA is going to win a pretty comfortable unanimous decision. Moving on to the co-main event, which takes place between the boa constrictor Alexey Oleynik and Walt Harris. Alexey Oleynik's not getting younger. Let's just put that out there right off the bat. His last fight, which was against Overeem, ended in pretty quick fashion. Overeem stopped him via strikes somewhat early in the first round. It didn't really tell us too much about where Alexey Oleynik is these days. I think he's 42 or 43. But he still knows how to grapple. He still has crazy good submissions, and if this fight gets to the ground, I absolutely see him catching Walt Harris in a submission. Walt Harris hits hard, like a lot of heavyweights do, so he could absolutely catch Alexey Oleynik, similar to how Overeem did, and he could end the fight that way. But the way I see it going down is I think Alexey Oleynik will get the fight to the ground, and from there I think he has a huge advantage. And I think eventually he's going to catch Walt Harris in a submission in the second round. That's my final prediction. I think this fight's pretty simple. It's either going to go one of two ways. It's going to end in submission with Alexey Oleynik being the winner, or it will end via stoppage, either TKO or knockout. And if it ends that way, I see Walt Harris coming out on top. So final prediction, Alexey Oleynik, submission, round 2. Moving on to another fight that's taken place in the UFC's heavyweight division. This one between former NFL standout Greg Hardy and Juan Adams. This fight should be entertaining while it lasts, if nothing else, because there's been quite a bit of, I don't know if I can necessarily say back and forth, because Greg Hardy hasn't really been talking too much himself, but Juan Adams has been talking crap about Greg Hardy since before he was even in the UFC. So he's been calling for this matchup for a while. He doesn't like Greg Hardy. He doesn't like some of the accusations that have gone against Greg Hardy, specifically the domestic violence stuff in the past. And because of that, he's wanted to fight Greg Hardy. He's been calling him out as much as he can. And now he finally got what he wanted, which is a chance to fight Greg Hardy in the UFC. So it'll be an interesting fight. They're both 1-1 in the UFC. Both are pretty green as far as MMA prospects go. I think Greg Hardy has more power. He has more potential in this fight via knockout or via strikes. But I think Juan Adams, if he chooses to use it, has much better wrestling and a much better grappling game. So just like the last fight, I see this fight going one of two ways. Either Greg Hardy's going to catch him early with a big shot and either knock him out or win the fight via TKO. And if that happens, it's definitely going to be in the first round. But if that doesn't happen, just like we saw in Greg Hardy's first fight, which he lost via DQ from throwing that illegal knee, I think if Juan Adams, like I said, I think he has a huge wrestling advantage. If he chooses to use that, which I think would be the smart game plan, I think he's going to wear on Greg Hardy. I think he'll be able to take him to the ground, or at least get him tired in grappling exchanges, shooting for takedowns. And as we saw in that first Greg Hardy fight, his cardio kind of failed him. He may have improved that, who knows, hopefully, maybe we'll find out in this fight. But I doubt he's improved it enough to make a huge difference in this fight. So I think Juan Adams' best route of victory in this fight is going to be shooting for the takedown relentlessly, wearing out Greg Hardy, and then probably finishing the fight maybe later on in like the second or third round once Greg Hardy gets super tired, and I think he can finish the fight via TKO if he makes it that far. So like I said, it's going to end in one of two ways. Either a quick knockout with Greg Hardy's hand getting raised, or kind of a long, drawn-out grappling affair in which I think Juan Adams will get his hand raised in the third round. My prediction, I think due to Juan Adams' clear dislike and disdain for Greg Hardy, I think he's going to fight emotionally. I don't think he's going to follow his best route to victory and the best game plan, which, like I said, is utilizing his wrestling. I don't think he's going to follow that game plan good enough. I think he's going to let his emotions get the best of him. He's going to try and stand and trade with Greg Hardy, and I think it's going to cost him. I think it will cost him the fight. I think it will probably cost him his consciousness, and I think he's going to lose via knockout in round number 1. Alright guys, moving on to the next fight, which takes place in the lightweight division between two giant lightweights. The first one being James Vick and the second one being Dan Hooker. This should be a good fight, if nothing else, because like I said, both these guys are huge lightweights. They usually have a giant size advantage over their opponents, but that will not be the case in this fight. How James Vick continues to make that cut to 155 pounds, I have no idea. The dude is, by all accounts, every bit of the 6'3" that he's built at, and from what I've heard, he also packs quite a bit of meat and muscle on those bones. So I don't know how he makes the cut to 155, but like I said, he usually has a huge size advantage over his opponents because of that. This fight, that will not be the case because Dan Hooker himself is 6 feet tall, and he's also not the skinniest dude in the world either. So it should be a fun fight while it lasts. Both of them are strikers. Dan Hooker may undoubtedly be one of the toughest dudes in the UFC. If you guys saw his last fight against Edson Barboza, you'll know exactly why I'm saying that. It was a tough fight to watch, man. Edson Barboza repeatedly hit him with hard shot after hard shot after hard shot. and the dude just kept on coming like the Terminator. Eventually he did get stopped with a body shot in the 3rd round, but he took a crazy amount of punishment in that fight, and he just kept coming forward. So if nothing else, the dude's a great fighter, and obviously he has a crazy heart, crazy toughness, and he's not an easy dude to finish. Prior to that setback against Edson Barboza, he had won his last 4 fights in the UFC, with all those 4 fights being finishes. James Vick, on the other hand, has lost his last 2 previous fights, the last one in the form of a unanimous decision loss to Paul Felder, and a knockout loss in the fight before that to Justin Gaethje. I think this fight should be a fun striking match while it lasts, but the way I see the fight going down is this. I think it will be a close match early on in the 1st round, with each fighter landing a decent amount of strikes, but in the 2nd round I see Dan Hooker landing a shot that hurts James Vick. I think it will drop him, I think he'll follow him to the ground, and I think he will finish the fight via strikes in the 2nd round. Moving on to the next fight, which also takes place in the UFC's lightweight division between Alexander Hernandez and Francisco Trinaldo. Now, Alexander is a great prospect, no doubt about that. He's 10-2 as a pro, with one of those losses being in his most recent fight against Donald Cowboy Cerrone, which in my opinion was one of those cases of too much too soon. I think, like I said, he's a great prospect. Dude's got a ton of potential. He's a great fighter. He's only 26 years old. Prior to that Donald Cowboy Cerrone setback in his last fight, he'd won 8 fights in a row. So honestly, on Saturday, I see him getting back to his winning ways, continuing where he left off before the Cowboy Cerrone fight. Francisco Trinaldo's undoubtedly a beast in his own right, but he is now 40 years old. He's not getting any younger, and I think eventually Father Time's going to catch up to him, just like it does everyone else. He did win his most recent fight against Evan Dunham, finishing Evan Dunham with a knee to the body in the 2nd round. Incredibly impressive performance, but I think Alexander Hernandez is a step above that without a doubt. Like I said, Alexander Hernandez is the much younger fighter. Hernandez brings a lot of pressure in all of his fights. He's not really necessarily a KO artist by any means, but he's very aggressive. He throws a ton of strikes, and over time the strikes tend to overwhelm his opponents, which is exactly what I think will happen in this fight. I think he'll either win a very comfortable unanimous decision, or he'll finish the fight in the 3rd rounds from an accumulation of strikes. Moving on to the last fight on the main card, which goes back to the heavyweight division, and it's a rematch between Andrei Arlovski and Ben Rothwell. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Arlovski as a fighter. The dude is a legend without a doubt. He has had a ton of incredible performances, a ton of great accolades in the sport, but he's 40 years old, and in his last 11 fights, he's only come out with 2 victories. So unfortunately, I hate to say it, but I do not see him getting his hand raised on Saturday. Like I said, this is a rematch. The first fight taking place in 2008, Andrei Arlovski did win that fight via KO, but that was over a decade ago. And Andrei Arlovski today is a completely different fighter compared to the Andrei Arlovski from over 10 years ago. So I don't think you can really take much, if anything at all, from that fight. It's going to be a completely different fight come Saturday. And I think Ben Rothwell will without a doubt get his hand raised. Now, Ben Rothwell is by no means a spring chicken himself. He's 37 years old, and he's only had 1 fight in the last 3 years. Most of that is because he was suspended by USADA, but at the end of the day, it's still only 1 fight in the last 3 years. With that 1 fight coming in last March, in which he lost I would say a somewhat controversial unanimous decision, although it was a very lackluster performance by both fighters. Honestly, I think Ben Rothwell should have got the victory. I think he landed the harder shots. I think he did more damage, but none of that really matters for this upcoming fight. With all that said, I still think he has more than enough tools at the age of 37 to beat the Andrei Arlovski of today, which, like I said, a lot's changed since their first fight over 10 years ago. And like I also said, Ben Rothwell still has a lot of power. He still throws really hard shots, and Andrei Arlovski has never been known for the greatest chin, especially not in 2019. Ben Rothwell throws heavy hands, and he has some great submissions. I believe he submitted Josh Barnett, so I think he could absolutely catch Andrei Arlovski with some type of submission. But I think the more likely route to victory is catching Arlovski on the chin with a power shot and ending the fight in the 2nd round. If that doesn't happen, I think he'll win a pretty clear unanimous decision. But my prediction is Ben Rothwell via TKO in the 2nd round. There you go, guys. Those are my predictions for UFC on ESPN 4, which, like I said, goes down this Saturday in San Antonio, Texas. All the action of the main card starts at 9 p.m. on ESPN 1, which is the big ESPN on cable, if you guys still have cable. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about my predictions down below. Let me know if you agree with my predictions or perhaps you think it's going to go down completely different. With that said, that's a wrap for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the fights, enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you next time.
Oh my goodness! Oh my God! Just like that! That is some serious power! Wow!